All right, let's get right into it. It is day 23 of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran, and things have escalated to a critical boiling point. Late last night, an ultimatum was dropped that could literally change everything. Let's break down exactly what is happening.
So this is the bombshell. This is the message from President Trump, posted on Truth Social. And let's be clear, this isn't a suggestion. It's a direct threat with a very real ticking clock. He's promising to obliterate Iran's civilian power grid if the Strait of Hormuz isn't completely opened up.
So yeah, a 48-hour clock is now officially ticking. Now, to understand how we got to this incredibly perilous moment, you have to look at this bizarre contradiction that's really at the heart of this whole war. I'm calling it the victory paradox, because on the one hand, you have the administration claiming total, absolute victory. But on the other hand, the reality on the ground, well, it tells a completely different story. So just look at this breakdown. On the left, you've got the official claims, the fireworks and the victory speeches. President Trump has said, quote, "We've knocked out everything," and even claimed 100% of Iran's military capability is destroyed. Okay, but then you look at the right. That's the reality. The Strait of Hormuz, still closed. Iranian missiles, still hitting Israeli cities. And the U.S. Navy, well, it's keeping its distance nearly 1,000 miles away from what it knows is basically a death trap. This massive gap between the rhetoric and the reality, that's the reason we're seeing this desperate ultimatum now. So, the crucial question is why? Why can't the world's most powerful military just sail in and force the strait open? Well, the answer lies in a really fundamental shift in modern warfare. Iran is using a strategy of what's called asymmetric warfare. See, they know they can't win a head-to-head fight with American aircraft carriers and fighter jets, so they don't even try to play that game. Instead, they've turned their own geography and a lot of low-cost technology into a weapon. And this is exactly how they're doing it. We're talking about swarms of cheap but very effective drones, advanced anti-ship missiles hidden along hundreds of miles of coastline, and they even have hypersonic missiles that can travel at Mach 16. It's no wonder that whenever the U.S. Navy runs war games on this exact scenario, the conclusion is always the same. It's a death trap. And you don't have to take my word for it. As one military analysis put it, just bluntly, the old rules are gone. In a narrow choke point like the Strait of Hormuz, missiles and drones dominate, and conventional naval power is basically neutralized. This military stalemate, it leads us to the real battlefield in this conflict. Because Iran knows its real leverage isn't taking on the military, it's economic. By closing the strait, they are waging war not on the U.S. Navy, but on the entire global financial system. The first and most immediate impact, of course, is energy. With the strait shut down, analysts are forecasting that oil could soon hit $150 a barrel, a price that would almost certainly trigger a global recession. And it's not just oil. A staggering 1/3 of the world's entire fertilizer supply comes through that strait. Closing it threatens a massive spike in global food prices and, the very real risk of widespread shortages. The damage is already being done. After Iran's retaliatory strikes on Qatar's natural gas facilities, Qatar Energy now estimates it's going to take at least 5 years to repair the damage. That is a long-term, devastating hit to Europe's energy supply. And the U.S. response to this whole economic crisis? Well, it's been described as a break-the-glass-in-case-of-emergency plan. They're suddenly lifting sanctions on Iranian and Russian oil that's already on tankers just to try and buy a few days of stable prices. It's being seen not as a strategy, but really as a sign of panic. Which brings us right back to the ultimatum. With that 48-hour clock ticking down, the entire world is watching to see which path gets taken. Is there an off-ramp to de-escalate, or are we about to climb a terrifying escalation ladder? We are already on the first rung of this ladder, with both sides hitting energy infrastructure. But the next potential step is just horrifying. Iran has threatened to target desalination plants, which provide up to 90% of the fresh water for countries like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. This isn't just a military tactic, it's an existential threat. And beyond that, analysts warn the nuclear option is, terrifyingly, on the table. And Iran has been crystal clear about its response if Trump follows through. A spokesman for their military declared that if Iranian power plants are hit, Iran will target all U.S. energy and IT infrastructure in the region, along with every single desalination plant belonging to U.S. allies. They are ready to match escalation with escalation. This has escalated so far, so incredibly fast, that the president's own decision-making is now being openly questioned. Analysts are using words like unhinged and irrational to describe the whiplash between claiming total victory and then issuing a world-altering ultimatum just an hour later. The discussion, believe it or not, has even turned to whether the cabinet should consider the 25th Amendment, the constitutional process for removing a president deemed unfit for office. It's an unthinkable step in American history, and yet it's now part of the conversation. And that really leaves us with the fundamental question of this whole conflict. When one side can neutralize a superpower's military with cheap drones and can weaponize the global economy, what does victory even look like anymore? Who can claim it, and what will be left when they do?
It is Sunday morning, March 22, 2026, and the U.S. president just logged off social media after basically declaring the war with Iran a total decisive victory.
Right. A complete triumph, according to the official statement.
Yeah, exactly. According to the official line, the enemy is completely vanquished. But, if the war is truly won, why is the United States Treasury, frantically unsanctioning millions of barrels of Russian oil today just to keep the Western world from freezing in the dark?
It's the ultimate paradox of modern conflict, really. We are watching this massive collision between a very triumphant military narrative and an absolutely collapsing global reality.
Welcome to today's deep dive. If you are listening to this right now, you are probably trying to make sense of a world that feels like it's, structurally tearing apart at the seams.
Oh, absolutely.
We are officially on the 23rd day of the war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. And our mission today is to cut through a very thick, very intentional fog of war.
Yeah, and it's thick for a reason.
Right. So we have this massive stack of sources in front of us today. We're talking raw journalist reports from the ground, YouTube videos from the last couple of days, geopolitical analyses, leaked military expert interviews, and some pretty terrifying emergency economic forecasts.
And importantly, all of this material was generated within the last 48 hours. The situation is moving that fast.
Right, so our goal isn't just to read you the headlines today, it's to look at the actual mechanics of what is happening beneath the surface, right? To analyze the most likely scenarios for the upcoming weeks.
Exactly, and to forecast the global fallout. Because, make no mistake, this localized shootout in the Middle East, it has already mutated into a global systems crisis.
Okay, let's unpack this disconnect, because this gap between what U.S. leadership is saying and what the global markets are actually doing, that's the core hook of our deep dive today.
It is. It's jarring.
Yeah. So on one hand, you have this incredibly confident, almost celebratory official narrative. Over the last 48 hours, the U.S. president has issued a series of just absolute claims.
Right, on social media.
Yeah, stating that Iran's Navy, their Air Force, and their air defenses are, quote, dead. He claimed the United States has met its military objectives weeks ahead of schedule.
Right, which is a narrative clearly designed to project total mastery of the battlefield. The rhetoric aligns perfectly with the aggressive military doctrine the U.S. and Israel launched at the start of all this.
You mean the decapitation strategy?
Exactly, the decapitation strategy.
Wait, let's pause there for a second, because our sources dedicate a lot of ink to this specific strategy. Historically, the decapitation strategy makes sense on paper, right?
On paper, sure.
You eliminate the high command, you cut off the head of the snake, and the body just dies.
Right.
And the U.S. and Israel have spent the last 3 weeks systematically hunting down and assassinating Iranian political and military leadership.
Right. They've been incredibly thorough.
They even took out a key elder statesman. This was a negotiator who actually had the diplomatic gravitas to maybe broker a ceasefire.
Which is an incredibly revealing tactical choice, if you think about it.
Yeah. How so?
Well, by eliminating the very figures who could negotiate a surrender, or even just a pause, the U.S. and Israel basically committed to a strategy of total regime collapse. The underlying assumption of a decapitation strike is that the adversary's command structure is this fragile, top-down pyramid.
Right, like a house of cards.
Exactly. You remove the apex predator, and the entire ecosystem just descends into paralyzing chaos. The soldiers in the field supposedly drop their weapons because, well, nobody's giving them orders.
But the reality on the ground, and the defense analysts in our source stack are just screaming this from the rooftops, is that Iran's military didn't collapse.
No, it didn't at all.
Why didn't taking out their top statesmen and generals cause the whole regime to crumble? Like it did in Iraq back in 2003.
What's fascinating here is the evolution of asymmetric military architecture. Iran watched exactly what happened to Saddam Hussein in 2003. They watched the U.S. military surgically dismantle a centralized command in, a matter of weeks?
Yeah, it was incredibly fast.
Right. So they spent the last 20 years building the exact opposite. They built a Hydra?
A Hydra, like cut off one head, two more grow back.
Precisely. Their command structure, specifically the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is deeply decentralized. It operates on this principle of localized autonomy.
Okay, so if a general falls.
If a general falls, a mid-level commander is already pre-authorized to take control of that regional missile battery or drone squadron. The system is biologically designed to absorb catastrophic losses and just continue firing.
Wow. And that resilience is really showing up in the battle damage assessments we're seeing. We aren't just seeing Iranian forces survive, we are seeing them strike back in ways that completely shatter the whole "we destroyed everything" narrative.
Oh, without a doubt, the pushback has been severe.
I want to look at a jarring detail from military reports here. Sources confirm that an Israeli F-16 was downed recently.
Yes.
But even more shockingly, a U.S. F-35 stealth fighter was heavily damaged by Iranian fire and forced to make an emergency landing at a regional base. Hang on. If Iran's air defenses are supposedly dead, how does a fifth-generation stealth aircraft, a jet that costs like $100 million and is invisible to radar, take heavy damage?
That is the exact question keeping Pentagon planners awake at night right now. To understand this, we really have to strip away the Hollywood myth of stealth.
Right, it's not a magic cloak.
Exactly. The F-35 is not a cloaking device from Star Trek. Stealth, or low observability as they call it, means the aircraft's physical shape and its radar-absorbent coating are optimized to deflect specific frequencies of high-band targeting radar.
So it just makes it harder to see.
Right. It delays the enemy's ability to get a weapons-grade lock on the jet.
It delays it, but it doesn't make it impossible.
Precisely. Against a highly sophisticated, layered air defense network, one that blends low-frequency early warning radars with optical tracking and just a sheer volume of fire, an F-35 can absolutely be painted, targeted, and hit.
Unbelievable.
The fact that an F-35 was forced to make an emergency landing, that means the airspace over Iran is still lethally contested. It completely shatters the aura of uncontested Western air supremacy.
And it isn't just local airspace they're contesting, right? Because the most staggering capability demonstration from the past few days wasn't defensive at all. It was offensive.
The Diego Garcia strike.
Yeah. Iran launched an intercontinental ballistic missile targeting the U.S. base at Diego Garcia.
This really cannot be overstated. Diego Garcia is a militarized atoll in the Indian Ocean. It is the logistical beating heart of U.S. power projection in that entire hemisphere.
Right, and for our listeners who might not be looking at a globe right now, let's paint a picture of this geography. Diego Garcia is almost 4,000 kilometers away from Iran's southern coast. 4,000 kilometers.
Massive distance.
Now, our sources do note that the missile didn't obliterate the base. One was intercepted, and I think another landed in the ocean. But the fact that they took the shot at all, that feels like a massive paradigm shift.
It is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the miss doesn't matter, the math matters.
The math.
Right. A ballistic missile travels in a parabolic arc, right? It exits the Earth's atmosphere before re-entering at hypersonic speeds. To accurately deliver a payload 4,000 kilometers away requires advanced telemetry, precise booster staging, and a highly sophisticated re-entry vehicle that won't just burn up in the atmosphere.
So it's not just a lucky shot.
Not at all.
Yeah.
By proving they have this technical capability, Iran just fundamentally rewrote the threat matrix.
Because if you can hit an atoll in the middle of the Indian Ocean, you can hit targets much closer to home.
Exactly. Draw a 4,000-kilometer circle around Tehran. That circle encompasses not just the entirety of the Middle East, but vast stretches of Eastern and Southern Europe. Nations like Italy are now well within the mathematical range of Iranian ballistics.
Wow, Italy.
Yeah. The illusion that this war could be neatly contained to the Persian Gulf, that evaporated the second that missile cleared the launch pad.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's like playing chess against someone who just flips the board. If the U.S. has truly won and eliminated the threat, why are U.S. warplanes taking damage, and why are ICBMs flying across the ocean?
Well, because we are witnessing the collision of two completely different philosophies of warfare. The U.S. fights a conventional, symmetric war. They seek traditional military dominance, destroy the enemy's tanks, shoot down their planes, occupy their airspace.
Standard playbook.
Right. But Iran is fighting an asymmetric war governed by a concept known as escalation dominance.
Okay, break down escalation dominance for us. How does an outgunned nation dominate an escalation?
So Iran knows it cannot win a conventional head-to-head dogfight with the U.S. Air Force. It would be suicide to try. But in an asymmetric war, they don't need to win a dogfight.
They just need to survive.
Exactly. Their goal is pure attrition. They just need to survive the initial onslaught and prove that, despite taking massive structural hits, they retain the capability to strike anywhere at any time, inflicting unacceptable economic and political pain on the U.S. and its allies.
Oh, I see.
So if the U.S. escalates vertically, say by dropping bigger bombs on military bunkers, Iran escalates horizontally. They strike unexpected, highly vulnerable civilian or economic targets across the region. They neutralize technological superiority with geographic and economic blackmail.
Which perfectly explains why, because Iran's military wasn't actually neutralized. This conflict didn't just end, it rapidly mutated.
Mutated is the perfect word for it.
We aren't looking at a military shootout anymore. We are watching a terrifying infrastructure war unfold, and the entire global economy is caught in the crosshairs. Because when a military realizes it can't win a quick, clean victory, panic sets in. And that panic is what drove the U.S. and Israel to cross lines no one thought would ever be crossed.
You're talking about the nuclear threshold.
I am. Let's look at the events of the past 48 hours because the escalation here is genuinely shocking. U.S. and Israeli forces struck the Natanz nuclear enrichment facility in Iran, as well as the Bushehr nuclear plant.
Which is unprecedented.
Right. Now, according to our sources, we have to emphasize that no radiation leaks have been reported. It appears they targeted auxiliary buildings or, surface-level infrastructure. But the sheer audacity of dropping munitions on a live nuclear site.
It is playing with fire on an apocalyptic scale. Even a perfectly calculated strike carries the inherent, unpredictable risk of an environmental catastrophe.
Right, a stray piece of shrapnel could change everything.
Exactly. It signals to the world that the U.S. and Israel have abandoned all traditional rules of engagement. They are willing to risk a radiological disaster to force a capitulation.
But Iran didn't capitulate. They didn't absorb the hit and ask for terms. In immediate, almost reflexive retaliation, Iran targeted the Dimona nuclear plant in Israel.
Which is the absolute core of their horizontal escalation strategy. Dimona is located deep in the Negev desert. It is the heavily guarded, open secret of Israel's nuclear weapons program.
And it's not like it's undefended.
Oh, far from it. Israel possesses some of the most advanced, multi-layered air and missile defense systems on the planet. You have Iron Dome for short range, David's Sling for medium, and the Arrow 3 system designed specifically to kill ballistic missiles in space.
And yet, an Iranian munition got through to target the Dimona complex. It's a terrifying tit for tat. You hit our nuclear infrastructure, we hit yours.
They are demonstrating that they will climb the escalatory ladder step for step, no hesitation.
But while the nuclear exchange is a terrifying psychological game, the actual tangible world-altering damage being inflicted right now is happening in the energy sector.
This is the true asymmetric battlefield. This is where Iran is leveraging its real power.
Our sources outline a massive coordinated strike by Israel and the U.S. on Iran's South Pars gas field. And I want to emphasize the scale here. South Pars isn't just a random target on a map. It is the largest natural gas field in the world.
The largest. Period.
Yeah, it is a sprawling complex of offshore platforms and onshore processing facilities.
It is the absolute economic lifeblood of the Iranian state. Striking South Pars was a calculated attempt to inflict such severe, immediate economic trauma that the Iranian government would face domestic collapse.
Tuck the purse strings.
Exactly. The logic was cut off their revenue, freeze their economy, and the war ends.
But once again, the calculation completely backfired. The strike on South Pars resulted in immediate, devastating retaliation. Iran didn't surrender. They lashed out at the Gulf states that are hosting U.S. military bases.
Because if you let the Americans fly from your territory, you are a target.
Right. And their first major target was the Ras Laffan LNG complex in Qatar.
We really need to slow down here and explain the mechanics of Ras Laffan, because this is where the local war becomes a global catastrophe. LNG stands for liquefied natural gas.
Okay.
You can't just pump raw gas into a standard cargo ship. To transport natural gas across the ocean, you have to cool it down to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. That's minus 162 degrees Celsius.
That is unimaginably cold.
It requires an industrial cryogenic process that shrinks the volume of the gas by 600 times, turning it into a liquid. The facilities that do this, called LNG trains or units, are marvels of modern engineering.
And they are massive, right?
Huge! They are massive, sprawling labyrinths of specialized compressors, turbines, and supercooled pipelines. They take billions of dollars and years to build. And crucially, they're incredibly fragile. You cannot simply patch a hole in a cryogenic pipeline with some sheet metal.
And the damage reports from our sources are staggering. Iran knocked out 2 of Qatar's 14 liquefied natural gas units. In a single coordinated strike, they wiped out 17% of Qatar's entire LNG production capacity.
17% gone in an afternoon. And that capacity cannot be rebuilt during a hot war.
And they didn't stop with Qatar. They hit the Haifa oil refinery in Israel, sparking massive chemical fires that burned for hours and just darkened the sky. They bypassed Saudi air defenses to target Saudi Aramco facilities in Riyadh. They systematically struck energy infrastructure in the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait.
They are meticulously setting the region's energy grid on fire.
I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a moment. You might be sitting in a cafe in London, or driving to work in New York, or prepping dinner in Berlin, wondering why you should care about a cryogenic gas facility in Qatar.
Right, it seems so far away.
Exactly. But here is exactly why you should care. Because within hours of that strike, Qatar declared force majeure.
The legal panic button of global trade.
Yes, the panic button. Force majeure is a contract clause that essentially says an act of God or war has occurred and we are legally freed from our obligations. Qatar had to instantly scrap major long-term natural gas contracts with Belgium and Italy.
Just tore them up.
The very energy that heats European homes, the power that keeps the lights on in Western manufacturing plants, it is literally going up in smoke in the Middle East as we speak.
What's fascinating here is the brutal underlying logic of Iran's strategy. The Iranian leadership has publicly declared this an existential war. When a state believes its very existence is ending, all restraint vanishes. They are operating under a doctrine we can call mutually assured economic destruction.
Mutually assured economic destruction. Wow, that is a chilling evolution of the old Cold War nuclear standoff.
It is, and it is highly effective. Iran's message to the Gulf states, and by extension the Western world, is brutally simple. If our energy infrastructure is destroyed, if we are violently prevented from exporting our oil and gas to survive, we will ensure that the infrastructure of our neighbors is equally destroyed.
If we go down, you go down with us.
Exactly. We will pull the pillars of the global economy down on top of ourselves. They are weaponizing their geographic proximity to the world's energy hubs to hold the global supply chain hostage.
But hitting the refineries and the LNG plants is just one half of this economic war. If you destroy the production, you cause a massive supply shock, sure. But the other half is choking off the transportation of whatever oil and gas manages to survive the bombings.
Which brings us to the water.
Right. And that leads us directly to the world's most vital maritime choke point.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Our sources paint an incredibly bleak picture here. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrow waterway separating Iran from the Arabian Peninsula. And it isn't just about crude oil, though roughly 20% of the world's petroleum passes through it. It's also about agriculture.
This is a point people miss.
Yeah, 1/3 of the world's fertilizer passes through this choke point.
Yeah.
Without that fertilizer, we aren't just looking at expensive gas, we are looking at global crop failures, food rationing, and skyrocketing inflation across every single sector of the economy.
And right now, as of day 23, the strait is effectively closed to all Western and Allied shipping.
And the brilliant, terrifying part of Iran's strategy is that they don't even need to physically sink every single ship that tries to pass.
No, the threat is enough.
The mere threat of an attack, backed up by a few targeted drone strikes on commercial vessels, has completely broken the insurance market. Maritime insurance premiums have skyrocketed to impossible heights. Major global shipping conglomerates have simply ordered their fleets to drop anchor or reroute thousands of miles around the Horn of Africa.
Which fundamentally alters the U.S. military's traditional role in the region. Historically, the U.S. Navy is the ultimate guarantor of open sea lanes. If a strait is threatened, a carrier strike group sails in, projects power, and commerce resumes.
But our defense sources are reporting an incredibly revealing development. The U.S. Navy has reportedly refused to send its surface ships into the Strait of Hormuz to clear it.
They won't do it.
They have war-gamed the scenario extensively, and the Pentagon has determined that sending a fleet into the strait right now is a, quote, death trap.
To understand why a superpower navy is backing down, we have to look at the geography. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. But the actual deep water shipping lanes, they are only about 2 miles wide in either direction.
Just 2 miles. So imagine trying to drive a massive, slow-moving armored truck down a narrow, winding alleyway. Now imagine that the rooftops on both sides of that alleyway are packed with hundreds of people holding Molotov cocktails and sniper rifles.
It's a nightmare scenario.
Your heavy armor doesn't matter if you have no room to maneuver, and the attacks are raining down from every conceivable angle. That is the U.S. Navy in the Strait of Hormuz right now.
It's the perfect analogy. The northern shore of the strait is bordered by hundreds of miles of the jagged Zagros Mountains in Iran. For decades, Iran has been tunneling into those mountains.
Building bunkers.
Yeah, they are packed with mobile, easily concealed anti-ship missile batteries. They have vast networks of suicide drone launch sites and fleets of fast attack swarm boats hidden in coastal caves.
Yeah.
If a billion-dollar U.S. destroyer sails into that 2-mile-wide lane, it is a sitting duck.
It would just be overwhelmed.
It would require a massive, sustained, bloody suppression campaign just to carve out a temporary, highly vulnerable, safe corridor.
So realizing that the U.S. Navy cannot solve this problem alone without taking catastrophic losses, the U.S. president pivoted to diplomacy. He begged traditional allies to form a multinational maritime coalition to force the strait open.
He asked everyone.
He went to the UK, France, Japan, South Korea, and the entirety of NATO, and every single one of them politely declined.
Because they know exactly what the U.S. Navy knows. It's a geographic death trap.
The diplomatic fallout from this refusal has been spectacular. The U.S. president was so infuriated by the rejection that he publicly called NATO a paper tiger. Our sources even detail a bizarre and deeply uncomfortable meeting where the Japanese prime minister visited Washington.
Oh, that meeting.
Yeah. The U.S. president, feeling abandoned by a key Pacific ally, publicly humiliated him by comparing Japan's reluctance to assist in the Middle East to their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor.
Which is a profound cultural and historical insult. But it highlights the psychology of the moment.
Yeah.
It exposes the extreme isolation of the U.S. position right now. European and Asian allies are terrified.
They want no part of this.
Right. They are watching the global economy fracture, and they refuse to be dragged into a regional conflagration that will only ensure their own energy supplies are targeted next. Being allied with the United States right now is increasingly viewed not as a security umbrella, but as a liability.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the military option to open the strait is stalled, and the economic pain is spiraling out of control. We're talking about oil prices threatening to hit $150, maybe $200 a barrel. The U.S. Treasury has panicked.
Total panic mode.
They have introduced a desperate break-the-glass contingency plan. Our sources describe this as some sort of 10D chess maneuver, but when you look at the mechanics, it just sounds like raw, unadulterated panic.
We are witnessing the economics of pure desperation. When military force fails to secure a resource, you have to manipulate the market to survive.
Exactly. To artificially suppress these exploding global oil prices before the Western economies plunge into a deep recession, the United States is quietly lifting sanctions on 130 million barrels of Russian oil currently floating at sea.
Let that sink in for a moment.
It's staggering. After years of sanctioning Russia, engaging in massive financial warfare over Ukraine, and demanding Europe wean itself off Russian energy, the U.S. is suddenly unlocking Russian oil to save its own markets.
It's a complete 180.
But wait, it actually gets crazier. The sources reveal that the U.S. Treasury is also issuing licenses to unsanction 140 million barrels of Iranian oil that is currently sitting in floating storage.
It is a breathtaking, almost incomprehensible policy reversal.
Hold on, I need to stop you there because I want to make sure I'm understanding the sheer absurdity of this. We are currently engaged in a massive kinetic war against Iran. We are dropping bombs on their infrastructure. We are trying to collapse their government.
Yes.
But at the exact same time, we are issuing licenses to unsanction 140 million barrels of their oil. Are we literally funding the military we are fighting?
You're reading that exactly right.
It is literally like a parent grounding a child for bad behavior, sending them to their room, taking away their phone, and then immediately bribing that same child with a $100 bill because the parent desperately needs the child to do a chore.
That's a great way to put it.
We are fighting a war to eliminate the Iranian regime while simultaneously lifting sanctions on their oil to save our own economy from the very war we started.
It's the ultimate paradox, and it reveals a profound geopolitical truth. It is an implicit, glaring admission of failure. The United States is admitting in real time that it can no longer control the global economic system through military force alone. By weaponizing their geography and absorbing the military blows, Iran has forced the U.S. to violate its own meticulously crafted sanction regimes.
But how does floating storage even work? Are there just massive ships sitting in the ocean acting as warehouses?
Exactly. When sanctions prevent a country from selling oil, they don't necessarily stop pumping it. They store it in massive supertankers that just idle in international waters. By abruptly unsanctioning these floating warehouses, both Russian and Iranian, the U.S. Treasury is hoping to suddenly flood the global market with millions of barrels of crude.
But that's a finite supply, isn't it?
Precisely. It's a Band-Aid on a severed artery. Flooding the market with floating storage might buy the West 10, maybe 20 days of price stability. It is a temporary, artificial buffer. The U.S. government is essentially buying 2 weeks of time, hoping against hope that they can figure out a decisive military solution before that artificial buffer runs dry and the real economic collapse begins.
But the market isn't stupid. The commodities traders know this is a temporary fix. That 20-day clock is ticking down fast, and the sheer panic of that ticking clock perfectly explains the sudden, massive escalation we saw from the U.S. administration late Saturday night.
You're referring to the ultimatum.
I am. Breaking news from our sources indicates that exactly at 7:44 p.m. EST on Saturday, the U.S. president issued a stark, highly public threat. He gave Iran exactly 48 hours to fully open the Strait of Hormuz to all shipping without the threat of attack.
A very tight window.
If they refuse to comply, the U.S. will, and I quote the official statement directly, obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first.
This represents a massive, highly dangerous shift in targeting doctrine. Targeting national power grids moves the war away from strictly military or energy export infrastructure directly into the realm of civilian survival. A power plant doesn't just run radar stations. It runs hospitals, water treatment facilities, and refrigeration for food.
It is a deliberate attempt to break the psychological will of the Iranian populace by plunging the entire country into the dark ages.
But true to their doctrine of asymmetric escalation dominance, Iran didn't blink at the ultimatum. They didn't scramble for diplomacy. Instead, they immediately issued a terrifying, highly specific countermeasure.
Our sources detail the Iranian response. If the U.S. follows through and targets Iranian civilian power generation, Iran has explicitly stated they will target the desalination plants in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar.
This is where we need to slow down, because this is the most critical vulnerability in the entire Middle East. Why desalination plants? If we connect this to the broader geographic reality, the Gulf states possess a fatal Achilles heel.
Explain that vulnerability, because to a lot of people, a water plant doesn't sound as strategic as, say, a nuclear base.
Iran is a massive country with diverse geography. They have natural water sources, rivers, ancient aquifers, and high mountainous terrain that captures seasonal rainfall. While losing power would be devastating, their population can survive without high-tech water processing.
But the Gulf states can't.
The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, do not have that luxury. They have built gleaming, futuristic metropolises in the middle of some of the most arid deserts on the planet.
So how do millions of people in Dubai or Riyadh get drinking water?
Through reverse osmosis, they rely almost entirely on massive industrial desalination plants. These facilities use immense amounts of energy to force seawater through delicate membranes at high pressure, stripping away the salt. Up to 90% of Kuwait's fresh water comes from these plants. 70% of Saudi Arabia's municipal water comes from desalination.
Imagine a modern city like Dubai. Millions of people, glass skyscrapers. Now, shut off the water. They don't have local lakes to draw from. How long can a society function like that?
They have perhaps 2 to 3 days of strategic water reserves and holding tanks. After that, it is a Mad Max scenario.
So destroying these plants isn't just an economic hit to the Gulf states.
No, it is an existential, civilizational threat. And these desalination plants are incredibly vulnerable. They are massive, highly exposed industrial complexes sitting right on the coastline. They are filled with fragile, highly specialized membranes and complex intake piping. You don't need $1 million bunker buster bomb to destroy them.
Just a few drones.
Exactly. A coordinated swarm of relatively cheap explosive drones can hit the intake pipes or the localized power substations, knocking a massive plant offline for months.
You were describing a timeline where, within 48 hours of a strike, you create a humanitarian crisis of biblical proportions. Millions of people left without drinking water in a desert climate.
If you destroy the desalination infrastructure of the Gulf, you are ending those nations as functioning societies. It is the ultimate deterrence.
It is truly apocalyptic, but the terrifying part of our deep dive today is that the U.S. isn't backing down from the ultimatum.
Not at all.
Our sources reveal that airstrikes aren't the only option on the table anymore. Despite the U.S. president's long-standing, highly vocal political vows to end forever wars and keep troops out of the Middle East, the reality of this crisis has forced a catastrophic pivot. We have confirmation that between 2,500 and 5,000 U.S. Marines, along with their accompanying amphibious assault ships, have been approved for deployment to the region.
Boots on the ground. It is the absolute last thing any military strategist wanted in this conflict.
According to the intercepted military chatter and expert analysis in our stack, the operational goal of this deployment is a highly risky maneuver to physically capture Karg Island or to attempt to secure the shoreline of the Strait of Hormuz with ground troops.
Let's talk about Karg Island for a second. It is a small rock in the Persian Gulf, but it handles roughly 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. It is a heavily fortified island.
This raises an important question, though. We just discussed how the U.S. Navy refuses to sail into the strait because it's a death trap. How exactly does a military, even the U.S. Marines, plan to physically occupy a narrow strait or a fortified island bordered by hundreds of miles of hostile mountainous coastline?
The short answer is, they can't do it without sustaining catastrophic losses. Amphibious assaults are historically the most complex, dangerous, and bloody military maneuvers imaginable. Our sources are drawing heavy, incredibly bleak parallels to Vietnam.
Explain that parallel. Why Vietnam?
Because it is a scenario where technological superiority is completely negated by geography and asymmetric tactics. If the U.S. attempts an amphibious assault on Karg Island, or tries to land Marines to hold territory along the strait, they are putting thousands of troops directly into the teeth of Iran's defenses.
Right into the meat grinder.
Exactly. Those Marines would be subjected to relentless 247 drone swarms, concealed artillery fire, and anti-ship missiles fired from mobile launchers hidden deep in the Zagros Mountains. It would be a slaughter. We could see thousands of U.S. casualties in a matter of days with virtually zero strategic gain. Taking a beachhead wouldn't magically open the strait to commercial shipping.
It would just turn a localized aerial conflict into a bloody, unwinnable ground quagmire. And as the United States prepares to sink deeper into this Persian Gulf quagmire, the rest of the world isn't just sitting still and watching. They are rapidly reorganizing themselves to take advantage of the chaos. The global chessboard is shifting under our feet in real time.
This is where horizontal escalation pulls in actors from all over the globe. The vacuum created by the U.S. focusing entirely on Iran is being filled immediately.
We are seeing the regional war widen at an alarming pace. Yemen's Houthis have officially entered the fray. They announced they will completely close the Red Sea to all U.S. and Israeli commercial and military vessels.
Which creates a devastating double choke point. If the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and you simultaneously can't transit the Red Sea to get to the Suez Canal, global shipping isn't just delayed, it is effectively severed in half. Supply chains are forced to route all the way around the southern tip of Africa, adding weeks of travel time and millions in fuel costs to every single shipment of goods.
And this immense geopolitical pressure is actively fracturing the U.S. alliance network.
Fracturing might be an understatement. We are seeing a quiet rebellion.
Let's look at the specifics. Spain is actively withdrawing its troops from Iraq. They are pulling out completely to avoid being caught in the crossfire. Why does Spain withdrawing matter so much? Because it signals to the rest of the world that the U.S. security umbrella is now viewed as a liability, not a shield.
Exactly.
We also saw reports that Germany's military camp in Jordan was damaged by a stray Iranian strike, which further unnerved European allies. They are realizing that hosting American forces or participating in American coalitions right now simply puts a massive target on their own backs.
And while the Western alliance system fractures under the strain, the silent beneficiaries of this conflict are watching very closely and maneuvering perfectly.
We are talking about Russia and China.
Exactly. This conflict in the Middle East is a strategic gift of unprecedented proportions for both Moscow and Beijing.
Let's start with Russia. Our sources highlight a critical logistical crisis. The U.S. is draining its precision missile stockpiles at an alarming rate just trying to swat down cheap Iranian drones. We actually have a stunning quote in our sources from the CEO of Rheinmetall, one of the largest defense contractors in Europe, admitting publicly that Western missile stocks are nearly empty.
It's an unsustainable burn rate.
They literally don't have enough interceptors left to fight a sustained multi-front war.
And while the United States and Europe burn through their finite, multi-million-dollar arsenals in the Middle East, Russia is advancing its strategic objectives in Ukraine. They're utilizing CIA-style proxy tactics, leaning on asymmetric warfare themselves, and simply waiting out the storm while the West completely exhausts its military-industrial capacity.
And then there's China, which is playing an incredibly sophisticated high-stakes long game. China is actually desperate for this war to end because their massive manufacturing economy relies heavily on the uninterrupted flow of Middle Eastern oil. But diplomatically, they are strictly adhering to a policy of total non-interference.
They're positioning themselves as the adults in the room.
Precisely. To unpack the psychology of this, while the U.S. is viewed by the Gulf states as the chaotic, destructive force-bombing infrastructure, issuing ultimatums and threatening ground wars, China is quietly stepping in as the stable, reliable partner. They are offering massive infrastructure investments, trade deals, and diplomatic mediation to the devastated Gulf states. They are presenting themselves as the responsible superpower alternative to an erratic American empire.
But the U.S. intelligence apparatus knows exactly what China is doing, and they are actively trying to counter it, which leads us to one of the most fascinating, bizarre nuggets from our deep dive today. It's the hidden front of this conflict, the Myanmar proxy war.
This is where the grand global strategy becomes starkly visible. Our sources reveal a wild geopolitical maneuver. To further blockade China's oil supply and exploit their reliance on energy imports, the U.S. is actively funding and arming militant groups in the dense jungles of Myanmar.
Right, which sounds random until you look at the map.
Just recently, Indian security forces arrested American and Ukrainian mercenaries who were caught smuggling advanced combat drones into Myanmar, their specific target, the China-Myanmar oil pipeline.
We need to explain the geography of this pipeline because it is a critical piece of global infrastructure. For decades, China has suffered from what strategists call the Malacca dilemma. 80% of China's oil imports travel by ship through the Strait of Malacca, a narrow waterway between Malaysia and Indonesia.
A huge bottleneck.
Exactly. China knows that in the event of a global conflict, the U.S. Navy could easily blockade that strait and starve China of energy.
So China built a backdoor.
Exactly. They spent billions constructing a massive deep-water port at Kyaukphyu in Myanmar and built a pipeline that runs straight through the Myanmar jungle directly into China's landlocked Yunnan province. It allows them to unload Middle Eastern oil in the Bay of Bengal and pump it straight into China, completely bypassing the Strait of Malacca and the U.S. Navy.
So let me make sure I am fully grasping the irony here. The United States is fighting a massive, chaotic war in the Middle East, ostensibly attempting to choke China's front-door energy supply via the Strait of Hormuz. And simultaneously, they are funding a jungle proxy war in Southeast Asia, using Ukrainian mercenaries to arm local rebels just to blow up a pipeline and choke China's backdoor.
If you connect these disparate events to the bigger picture, you have hit the nail on the head. The war in Iran is not an isolated incident about regional politics, or the nuclear deal, or even Israel's security. If you zoom out, this entire conflict is the centerpiece of a grand, desperately flawed geopolitical strategy by the United States to maintain global primacy. They are attempting to impose a worldwide systemic oil blockade on the emerging multipolar world, specifically targeting the economic lifelines of China.
It is an aging empire trying to hold on to its unipolar power by violently squeezing the global energy supply.
And that desperation to maintain control, that willingness to weaponize the very foundations of global trade, is exactly what is driving the world toward unprecedented deindustrialization and a highly probable global depression. The U.S. administration is demonstrating that they're willing to break the world economy in order to maintain their position at the top of it.
So what does this all mean for us? We are looking at day 23 of a conflict that has slipped all conventional leashes. The precariousness is absolute. We have a 48-hour clock ticking down on a presidential ultimatum to obliterate civilian power grids, which will inevitably trigger a retaliatory strike on the desalination plants, threatening millions with death by dehydration.
The stakes couldn't be higher.
The diplomatic off-ramps have literally been assassinated. The U.S. military is prepping for a catastrophic ground war in a mountainous death trap, while the U.S. Treasury is simultaneously unsanctioning the enemy's oil out of sheer, undeniable economic desperation. It is a masterclass in chaotic escalation.
It is a complex, interconnected system being pushed violently past its breaking point.
I want to talk to you, the listener, one last time. You might be listening to this deep dive far away from the Persian Gulf. You might feel insulated by oceans and borders. But within weeks, the shockwaves of this system's failure will reach you.
It's unavoidable.
You are going to feel this at the gas pump when prices double overnight. You will feel it at the grocery store as the lack of Hormuz fertilizer causes global crop yields to plummet and food prices to spike. You are going to feel it in the fundamental, irreversible restructuring of the global economy. This isn't just another news story about unrest in the Middle East. It is an economic earthquake.
And there's one final chilling concept that I think everyone needs to mull over as they process these events. It's the concept of the petrodollar.
Explain the petrodollar, because it's the invisible glue holding the American economy together.
Let's look at the history. Since the early 1970s, after the gold standard was abandoned, the foundation of American financial supremacy has been backed by the petrodollar system. The U.S. struck a deal with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. A grand bargain. The agreement was that all global oil must be traded exclusively in U.S. dollars. In exchange for cementing the dollar as the world's reserve currency, the United States military would provide an ironclad security umbrella to protect the Gulf states and their royal families from regional threats.
It was a global protection racket. You trade in our currency, we protect your oil fields.
Precisely. But look at what is happening today on day 23. That grand bargain is disintegrating. The U.S. military presence in the region is no longer a shield. It is the very thing getting Gulf state energy infrastructure destroyed. The security umbrella has become a geopolitical lightning rod. If you are a leader in Qatar or the UAE or Saudi Arabia watching your LNG plants and refineries go up in flames because of American military actions, you have to be asking yourself a fundamental question.
How long until those nations decide the deal is dead?
Exactly. How long until the Gulf states demand oil payments in a different currency, perhaps the Chinese yuan or a BRICS alternative, to distance themselves from American targets? Because the moment the world stops needing U.S. dollars to buy energy, the massive demand for U.S. debt vanishes. If the petrodollar breaks, it effectively ends the American financial empire overnight. It would trigger hyperinflation and a domestic economic crisis, the likes of which the West has never seen.
It all comes back to that murky diagnosis we discussed at the very start of this deep dive. The satellite feed is broken. The clean, binary lines of conventional warfare of winning and losing on a map are gone. They have been permanently replaced by a tangled, terrifying web of infrastructure attacks, brittle global supply chains, and pure economic desperation. The fog of war has never been thicker, and the stakes have never been higher. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives you are fed, look past the official statements, try to understand the mechanics behind the headlines, and above all, stay curious. We'll see you next time.